Throughness is one of these terms that gets tossed around in dressage that's kind of vague. And we can, we wonder, what are trainers really talking about? Is it head carriage? Is it a feeling that the horse gives us? Well, we're going to talk about it at length today. But simply put, throughness is related to obedience, it's related to responsiveness, and a lack of resistance in the aids, and the aids in the way in which the aids shape the horse's body. So dressage trainers like to use the English word permeable to describe the quality of throughness, which comes from the German expression Dressage, the literal translation of which is letting through. And I'm not going to say that word again. If there's anyone here who's good at speaking German. So again, the English translation is permeable, and the direct translation is this idea of letting through. So in his book, Misconceptions and Simple Truths in Dressage, Henry von Schaik writes, "A horse is permeable when it lets the impulsion created by the driving aids of the rider go from the hindquarters through the back and neck muscles, causing flexion of the pole and causing the horse to accept the bit without stiffening the jaw. The acceptance of the bit means that the driving aids and the guiding aids have met. At this point, the process reverses itself, the guiding aids regulating the impulsion." So put really succinctly, throughness is connecting both ends of the horse and regulating the energy back and forth between the forequarters and the hindquarters. The horse accepts the drive to the contact, from the hocks up to the bit and back again without resistance. That is throughness. Throughness is the underlying concept behind changing the balance of the horse. So it's not just that we want the horse to answer us without resistance, it's that we're actually trying to get that malleability to shift the balance of the horse. Shifting the balance of the horse is arguably the main point of dressage. In dressage, we're ethically responsible to train the horse in a way that relieves some of the burden on its front legs. We know that the horse carries 60 to 65% of its weight on its front legs, and when we sit on it, we burden the front end even more. And so in dressage, we feel that it's our responsibility to help the horse learn to carry us with their strong hindquarters and their strong hind legs, so that they don't prematurely wear out their front legs and they become easier to ride. So we have a simple garden hose metaphor that we can use that can be useful in understanding throughness and dressage and the regulation of energy. So you have a garden hose. At one end, you have a faucet that's producing water flowing forward. At the other end, these are the rider's driving aids, of course. At the other end is a spray nozzle of some kind, which allows more or less water to pass through it. When the rider closes the nozzle, the water or energy is contained, although it's still under pressure, and as soon as you were to open the nozzle, it would go forward again. The rider in this case could be bottling up the impulsion and creating a shift of balance towards the hind legs, such as resulting in piaffe, which is forward movement arrested and marking time on the spot. If the rider opens the nozzle of the garden hose all the way and directs with the seat to send all of the power forward, that's your extension. So again, we're regulating that energy that's being generated. The levade, although it's not practiced much anymore, and it is an example of the highest degree of throughness. All of the stored power, the impulsion, has been arrested by the rider, bringing the hind end under to the most extreme point of engagement and greatest possible shift of balance, to where 100% of the horse's weight is on its hind legs and 0% is on the front legs. So even though we are probably not going to be doing that in our daily practice, at least not on purpose, you can kind of think of that ultimate range, right? Of like, that's how far it could go with throughness.
That's what my horse did in the wash stall the other day.
Oh, there you go. The A+ sensei. Very powerful hindquarters. All right. So in our minds, it's not hard to imagine a horse and rider moving in and out of collection and extension smoothly in all the gaits without resistance, right? It's what we all dream about. We can see it in our heads. But what are some examples of a lack of throughness, right? Because that's probably more realistic. Resistance, or horses who just don't understand the aids yet. So some examples of not throughness are horses that have gaits that are not adjustable. You can't ask the horse to take a longer step. You can't really ask the horse to take a shorter step. The pole or the neck could be stiff, right? You know that feeling when we take up the reins and there's just stiffness here. We're not really getting any effect through the body. or the hind legs may not engage. So I want to take a second and talk about what are we talking about when the hind legs engaging, right? So what I mean when I say the hind legs don't engage is that they're not stepping under the horse's body. They're not taking that little bit longer reach where they get closer to the center of gravity and they can support the main mass of the horse. So sometimes when Paul and I are looking at young horses and we're looking at videos of horses and we're trying to decide, oh, would this be a good prospect? Would we like to buy this horse? There's this thing that we look for that we call bicycling in the hocks. And so if you're watching a horse trot by and it looks like its hind legs are out behind its hips, the hocks are in the tail when it's trotting, like it's pedaling a bicycle behind it, that's not good, right? You don't want a horse that has a hind leg that spends most of the time out behind the body. You'd like a horse who looks like he's really tucked under himself, and that but we see that and we think, oh, that's going to be hard because now instead of just training the hind leg to come from here to here, I've got to train the hind leg to come from way back here all the way to here. And often those horses also have a kind of a flat hip, right? Their croup is not sort of round and under them they're a bit flat. So it's more of a natural tendency based on breeding and confirmation, but that's a good question. Going on to this idea of engagement, when we're working on throughness, or really any stage of dressage training, the horse has to learn to step under without the evasion of leaning down, which serves to negate the positive effects of the stepping under. If the horse can lean down when it steps under, the weight may still have really been borne for the most part on the front legs because the horse may have been lightening the hips in order to get that leg to reach under, instead of tucking the hip, using the psoas, iliopsoas, transverse abdominis to pull the hips under. So that's an important note to see, like, oh, my horse only lengthens the trot if I put the neck down. That's a little bit of a red herring right there, right? It's telling you that, oh, I had to put more weight on the forehand to get the hind legs lighter and more facile. The horse must answer when the rider asks for forward energy, so that the rider can teach the horse to bring its fine hind legs further under the body. This is the source of changing the balance. However, we have to ask ourselves honestly, when I ask for forward energy, does my horse answer? Does my horse give it to me in a calm and measured way? Is the horse reluctant? Or the opposite, is the horse really charging? If the water is gushing out the end of the hose or the horse is rushing around, it doesn't mean we're developing carrying power, which is the kind of power that helps us change the balance. This is what Alan Podolsky, director of the Spanish Riding School, meant when he said impulsion is not the wind in the rider's hair. Impulsion involves some carrying power. So there's a difference between engagement, which is the hind legs coming under, and carrying power. And that's what we're going to talk about for a minute. It's probably one of the most important things in regards to throughness and actually shifting balance. So race horses have tremendous engagement because their hind legs come so far under their body in the gallop stride, right? Or imagine National Geographic used to have these amazing pictures of cheetahs in full stride, and the cheetahs look like they're almost folded in half, right? Their hind legs are like in front of their chin, right? Again, amazing engagement. However, all of that power that's been generated is generated as thrust or just forward energy. It's very useful for speed, but it's not really useful for dressage, because in dressage we want to develop carrying power and weight shifting. So sometimes people are riding really actively forward and they're thinking, I'm dragging those hind legs under. But what they're doing is they're just generating thrust. They're just going forward. So they're not ultimately developing the carrying muscles in the horse. So it's important that the rider be aware of the difference between developing engagement that leads to a shift of balance, or if you're only developing thrust, which often can happen if you ride a little too much in long and low posture. So if you're kind of letting your horse stretch again, because that's when you feel the stride lengthen and the frame lengthen, and the horse is going more forward, it seems to be taking bigger strides, but again, the balance is shifted a little onto the forehand, and the horse is really just moving forward quite a lot. So again, that's more developing thrust instead of developing carrying power. In the very beginning, young horses must go forward actively in an uphill shape, not always the long and low shape. We aren't very concerned in the very beginning with developing a lot of carrying power, because you first have to develop impulsion and willingness to generate the energy so that the rider has something to redirect. So in the very first few months of riding the young horse, they need to be uphill, they need to be on the bit, but they do just need to go forward. I do want to just generate thrust in the very beginning so that I have something to shape, right? That I have a willingness and a bit of a spark going forward. As the saying goes, with young horses, if you don't have forward, you don't have anything. If the horse doesn't go forward, you can't ride it. There is a school of thought that young horses must go forward in a long outline, which isn't necessarily true. Young horses can learn to go uphill as they move freely forward, and that builds in a bit of that correct engagement from the beginning. You are adding in a little layer of carrying power with the active forward riding, because they're not just leaning down. The hind legs can drive under without getting so light in the hips, which is what can happen if you go a little too long and low. To further understand the difference between thrust and carrying power, imagine a horse in passage. Like we just had the Olympics this summer. I don't know if any of you watched it, but you can imagine the horses in a highly cadenced, prancing trot. It's been called the least efficient gait if you actually want to go anywhere, because it uses a tremendous amount of energy and you're not going forward. Okay, so that's carrying power, right? We've taken the energy and we've sent it up instead of forward. Okay, now imagine that horse now goes across the diagonal in the big extended trot. The long, powerful stride of the extended trot, the horse is moving far more forward than up, right? Usually it looks very, very smooth, like a boat sailing across calm water. So that's all thrust, right? That's the opposite of the passage, which is all up. Okay, so that pretty much covers impulsion. So we'll go on to the submission half now. If impulsion addresses one of the two ends of the horse we're trying to connect with throughness, submission, or acceptance of the bridle and the guiding aids, addresses the other end. Submission is the hose nozzle, the regulator of the forward energy. Now the bit is not physically holding the horse back or holding it up. We know this isn't possible because a horse can bolt while pulling on the bit as hard as it can while the person is pulling as hard as they can, right? A bit does not hold a horse up. The horse has to be trained to understand that the bit is not a prop for the neck or anything to be avoided, but that it's a proprioceptive balance point, a point of reference for where in space that horse should be carrying its body. In the same way that you may briefly rest your hand on the back of a chair while walking through a darkened room, the bit is a spatial reference point for that horse. When you're walking through a darkened room, you don't grab the chair and lean onto it and stop walking, you just use it to guide you as you continue on. Okay, so I recently saw this YouTube video about the Rockette dancers. For some reason, YouTube thinks that all I want to see is dance videos, which is fine. I like dance videos, ballet, Rockettes, whatever. So they're in their famous chorus line, they're doing the high kicks, right? And they have their arms around each other, or so it seems. So, as you can imagine, it's very difficult to balance on high heels and bring your leg up here. Very hard. I will not demonstrate. This video was explaining that even though their arms are around the back of the dancers beside them, they're strictly forbidden to lean on the other dancer or hold on to the other dancer. They have a term that they call feeling the fabric, so that you're just supposed to be brushing the other dancer's costume. So it's a reference to how lightly they're really touching each other, and each dancer is really maintaining their independent balance. Okay, so that's the ideal. Now it's one thing to say, feel the fabric lightly, but our horses, probably like the Rockettes when they're first learning, will actually vary widely in their contact and their balance when they're learning to carry a rider and they're learning how to react to the aids. So I always want people to understand not to get discouraged if sometimes their horse is light and sometimes their horse is heavy, and they go in and out of phases, or even just from moment to moment in the ride during a day, on a given day. So when we're training the horse to accept contact and go on the bit, and I'll just take a side note here, so what does it mean to be on the bit? It means that we have a high arch in the neck, the poll is at the highest point, and the nose is at or slightly in front of vertical. So when we're trying to train for that ideal, we may experience horses curling, which means they're tucking their nose because they don't want us to use the bit. We may experience a horse who braces and pulls, or a horse who has their balance fairly well, and then maybe you try to do a walk transition and whoa, they fall down, right? They can't quite get it done. So it's all over the place. I'm training this really lovely 3-year-old Andalusian right now, and he's learning to go smartly forward in this beautiful trot, shape's getting better and better. But when we get to the downward transition, oh, poor thing, he's just like kerplop. Like he has not learned how to decelerate with the hind legs yet. So I have such a nice connection for the upward transition and going around the ring, but then when we get to the downward transition, he hasn't learned that yet. So that's an example of like just a really varying contact within a given ride with a horse. Okay, so ideally the rider has stabilized the neck shape by putting the horse on the bit, which prevents the horse from using its neck as a balancing rod, which is the natural tendency. So when horses are galloping around in the field, they've got their neck up, they bring it this way, they bring it this way, they use it all the time as a balancing rod. When we ride them in dressage, we're trying to quiet that end of the horse, to stabilize the neck so we can teach them to balance with the other end of their body. And we're really taking that neck balancing away from them. But that's what they have to learn in order to be able to carry us in a way that we can shift their weight, that doesn't wear out their front legs, and that we can teach them the upper level movements. I have a saying that's really overly simplistic, but I have said this in my lessons before, so I'll say it to you here. Get the horse to answer you with its legs, not its head. So if you're just getting too much, head and neck movement, then you know that you're not getting submission, which means it's going to be hard to build throughness. The most important thing that the horse must learn, aside from answering the driving aids promptly and sincerely, is that the rein must not get blocked in the jaw and in the neck. In order to develop throughness, the rein aid must pass through the neck and back to the hind legs. We have to teach the horse from early on not to drop the base of the neck and use its strong under neck muscles against us. So sometimes we'll see a horse who seems to be on the bit, but if you look at him from the side, he looks like pigeon-throated, like a pigeon breast looks, and they've dropped down and they're using these sternobrachial muscles against you. When the horse is properly on the bit, their under neck looks soft. You can see the jugular groove, and then you see the strong, smooth tube of muscles at the top called the longismus. So that's a very interesting and important thing about being on the bit that sometimes people don't realize. Because they'll say, oh, the pole is up, the pole is flexed, isn't my horse on the bit? And I'll say, well, you're probably feeling some heaviness because the horse has pushed their neck down into the base of the neck. All right, the reason that there's so much focus on the head and neck in dressage is because riders all over the world for hundreds of years have known that the neck is the gateway to the hind end, that it is the spoiler to shifting the balance and ultimately to collection, which is the bringing under of the hind legs, tucking of the hips, and the weighting of the hind legs. So the horse, as we're training the neck, the horse can block us in many different ways in the neck, and then we just can't get at the back and the hind legs. So that's why we train them to be on the bit, to try to weave the neck into the back. We want the top line to feel like one piece. If the neck has been trained to be floppy or hyperflexible or disconnected, like when people ride in roll cur or they do a lot of really excessive left to right bending, they're kind of disconnecting the neck from the rest of the body. The aids will still be lost in the neck, in the same way that they won't be received by the back and hind legs if the jaw is stiff. So it's an equally difficult fault if the neck is too soft versus if the neck is too hard. So going back to the idea of that neck getting too soft and spongy, or the horse curling, this is important, but a few years ago, the USDF changed the terminology in the training pyramid to be from relaxation to suppleness. And I thought that this was really interesting, because I've certainly taught a lot of lessons where people say, I thought my horse was supposed to be relaxed. But then they think kind of like relaxed is like relaxed on the couch. Like it's not like an athlete who's ready and poised, and maybe is mentally relaxed, but physically has muscle tone, has positive tension. That's a new phrase that I like that has been spread around a lot lately. So it was confusing to people because they didn't know how they were supposed to do an athletic event while they were being relaxed. So they took that out. So that's another thing when we're working on throughness. We don't have throughness because the horse is relaxed. We have throughness because the horse is supple and permeable. The horse must be like a bow that is strung, or a dancer who's ready to spin or leap or tap dance. Sports psychologists and therapists agree that a certain level of stress or arousal is optimal for performance and success. They all say that you cannot be too chilled out and then go out and successfully complete a certain task. So it's another thing to think about our horses. They do have to get up a little bit as we warm them up. Their cardiovascular system starts increasing. They have a little bit of adrenaline. There's a slight amount of cortisol, but it's really just the necessary amount to do a job, just like as if we were going out for a jog. Okay, So this brings us to the rider's responsibilities in regard to contact and balance while developing throughness. So first, the rider must work to have good balance and a secure seat. One reason is because the rider's position is also a point of reference for the horse. When the rider sits a certain way, it can mean collection, extension, or stretching. Secondly, the rider has to have control over their own balance so they can feel the horse changes balance in either a positive or negative way. It could be as small as just a couple of inches in the very beginning of the horse tipping this way or tipping that way. Or it can be as obvious as the horse falling and yanking on the reins. But either way, the rider has to have the core strength to either not get pulled out of the saddle when the horse yanked, or to be steady enough that they can feel the small shifts in balance. The horse must not be allowed to pull the rider out of position, because then it is the horse moving the rider's balance instead of the rider shifting the horse's balance. Now horses are really smart. Few of them, except for green horses, will just rip the reins out of your hands because they know that you'll do something about it, right? They know that you'll immediately correct them. So most horses are really, really clever, and they just will do these little tiny fish bumps on the rein, the little half halts, to just tip the rider forward a little bit throughout the ride. Then the horse is on the forehand, the rider doesn't realize it, la la la, ride's over, horse goes back to the pasture. So we sometimes ask during our lessons, like, who is half halting who here? Is the rider half halting the horse, or is the horse half halting the rider? So we'll discuss that in a minute, the importance of keeping your shoulders quite stiff. Let's see here. Where are we? So we're going to do an exercise here. I need a volunteer. So go ahead and put yourself in good riding position so you can bend your knees a little bit. You can hold your imaginary reins. You won't touch anything yet. Okay, so first I'm just going to test her core strength and test her stability, right? And so this could just be, you know, the forces of physics that are working on you when you're, you know, riding your horse. You've got centrifugal force, you've got gravity, you've got velocity, you've got all these things throwing you all over the place. Okay, so first I'm just going to pull a little bit. Very good. Yep. And so when I pull on her, she's going to tighten up her abs. She's going to think like she's sinking a little bit, and she's going to kind of press her elbows and her underarms down just a little, so really tight. You're going to let me pull through your waist at all. That's pretty good. Okay, now to prove to you guys, we are going to use a scale that has an actual number, okay? So that you know that we're not just, we're just using a parlor trick here. Okay. Okay, so first we're going to just get your baseline. It does not matter what the number is, by the way, so don't feel like you have to like get 50 pounds. Okay, so I'm just going to pull on you a little bit, really stiff. Yep, kind of tuck your tail under you just a little. There you go, really firm, really firm. Wow, good. Okay, so she's up to 8 pounds. All right, so that's pretty strong. It's a pretty good pull here. All right. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to have you just relax your shoulders. Just relax your shoulders. Well, you can still be in good riding position. Okay, but now just relax your shoulders. Give the horse a little rein. Just give the horse a little rein. Okay, really good. Really good. Okay, so 5 pounds and I pulled her right over, right? So you can see that if the rider does not hold their upper body really firmly, that then the horse can again just half halt them forward pretty easily. So now we'll go back again. So really, really firm. Kind of tuck your tail. Think you're pressing down. Hold your abs. Hold them really strong, very strong, very strong, very strong, very strong. Wow, 12. Okay, so really nice. So there, now she's learning the exercise how to hold herself. She went from 8 to 12, which is really good. But I pulled her over at 5 earlier. Okay, so now, let me see here. I gotta do one other thing. Okay, so this is a good example of core strength, right? However, we don't hold the reins with our hips, right? You hold the reins with your hands. The trick is to feel the tug here, but you answer here.
Oh, wow.
Okay? Yeah, so the horse is going to challenge you. Just don't give your shoulders, hold your core. Very good, okay? So I'm challenging her, and in order to keep her balance and to show the horse that there's power and stability behind just the arm, right? Because our arm is this big and the horse's neck is this big. Right, so we have to use our core in order to balance ourselves on the horse. Okay, so I'm gonna challenge her here, but I'm gonna grab her there. Okay, now what I want you to do is relax your core. Now, just try to block me in the hand. Okay, so that's the rider using no core. Okay, now go ahead, hold your core. Okay, now I'm gonna challenge her in the hand. I'm pulling quite hard. I'm pulling very, very hard. Okay, so very good. So what's wonderful also about that response is she was not leaning back against the reins. So when I let go ahead and lean back a little bit. When I let go, she was going to fall backwards, right? But she has an independent seat, she has good balance, she's using her core, so the horse pulls, okay, gives up, horse gives up, she's still in good position. She didn't fall backwards onto the horse's loins, and she didn't fall forwards. So that was great. Okay, now for this next part, you're just gonna close your eyes, but I'm not gonna do anything, so don't worry. Okay, so so you can leave open until, I guess I won't make you stand there for 5 minutes while I'm talking with your eyes closed. Okay, so this next part, you can relax for just a minute if you want to. This next part is about why contact is so important in developing throughness. And it's because the rider, again, as we said, the rider has to have stability so that they're a point of reference for the horse, but also so that they can feel the changes in the horse. So now let's talk about why we have to have contact. So first of all, because we have it's the guiding and restraining aid, but also because it tells us a lot about how the horse responded to our aids. Okay, so go ahead and close your eyes. And we're going to have no contact. Okay, so did the horse raise or lower its head?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly, right? See, she has no contact. So how would she know if the horse raised or lowered its head? Okay, now we're going to take up contact. Okay, now did the horse raise or lower its head?
I'd say he raised it.
Okay, good. All right, so now did the horse raise or lower its head?
Now it's lowered.
Very good. Okay, you can open your eyes. So that's one reason why it's really important to have contact when we're developing throughness, not only for the permeability of the aids, but also so that we're really assessing with all of our senses how the horse responded. Okay, very good. Okay, so now you're in good position. You have the horse on the aids. You've resolved not to yield your shoulders and not to yield your hands at the wrong moment. Now what do you do? So now we're going to talk about exercises for throughness. So throughness is what lets us make any transition without losing balance. This means walk to halt, trot to walk, canter to walk, any transition that you can imagine, extended canter to collected canter, massage to extended trot. All of these transitions are balanced because of throughness. Transitions can teach throughness, and they're also a real bellwether for throughness. They can help us find the blocks and the resistances and let us feel that if the shift of balance has occurred towards the front or the hind end of the horse. Here is why. Throughness is about acceptance of the aids and the regulation of the energy flowing from front to back and vice versa. In order to train a shift in the balance more towards the hind legs and relieve the front legs, which we've already overburdened more than nature did, we have to try to teach the horse how to carry us with a strong, powerful hind end. And horses can do this because they can be trained to decelerate with the hind legs. So let's talk about physics for just a second and the difference between like a horse and a car. So physics tells us that an object in motion tends to stay in motion. The mass of the horse is kind of like the mass of a car, but in a car, you're moving forward, you hit the brakes, the front of the car goes down, and you feel yourself come against the front of the seatbelt, right, because of the velocity. Horses are unique in that they can be trained to decelerate with the hind legs, to slow the mass down with the hind legs, and that the hind legs can be the brake and catch the load. And when we have a transition where the horse uses its hind legs, it's very comfortable. The horse doesn't come into the hand, the horse doesn't throw us forward, and it's very rideable. So if the horse pulls down in any transition that you make, it's the same as the nose of the car dropping down when you hit the brakes. You know it wasn't a smooth touchdown with the rear landing gear of the plane taking most of the load. If the front end didn't go down and it felt pretty smooth, the only answer is that the hind legs helped you. So even if you're not, a genius horse trainer, you can just do transitions and you can ask yourself, what is the result? Where do I feel like the weight shift happened? When horses are learning transitions, they will, of course, pull down like my young horse or fall forward like my young horse as they learn to move under the weight of the rider. The rider must keep the horse on the aids, so that's again where the core strength comes in. So my coming to, from trot to walk on my young horse, and he's like, oh, I'm losing my balance. I have to just be able to hold that and block it. I don't want to yield and go with him, because then he doesn't learn anything. Of course, I'm not going to yank on him and make his head fly up and make him nervous. I'm just going to resist. I'm just going to hold and resist, just like Suzanne said, with that passive hand and the strong core. And then I ask the horse to do it again. So again, when we're analyzing transitions, we want to ask, did the horse raise its neck and go hollow, which would also push the hind leg out behind? Did the neck stay steady and soft? Was the transition smooth or was it rough? Through repetition and firm core, the rider can teach the horse not to make the transitions by pulling, but by stepping further under the body to catch the load, keeping the control soft and stable. The rein and the rider have to be a consistent barrier to leaning down and a consistent source of encouragement to step under. So that's why we'll often coach people to ride actively into their transitions. There's a young event rider that I was teaching, and she has to go to a very simple test, just trot to canter to trot, nothing too fancy. And she said, gosh, I just can't get my transition steady. My horse's head keeps coming up and bumping, every time I make one. And she's like, I keep trying to slow her down and relax her before the transition. I said, well, that's actually not the answer, it's the opposite. You need to get her to reach further under her body with her hind legs before the transition. So when she goes from canter to trot, she actually canters really actively forward, swings those hind legs under, and then touches down when the hind legs are here. When she was relaxing her horse and softening it before the downward transition to trot, the hind legs were actually taking shorter and shorter strides. So then the horse just bumped down like this, right, instead of coming under and again catching itself. So that was a little bit of a contradictory notion, but once I showed this young rider that really you have to have more power coming in her transitions, then she had a lot easier time with it. Okay, so the transitions address the longitudinal field of balance. We have two fields of balance in the horse, right? Longitudinal front to back, and then we have the lateral field of balance left to right. So when we're talking about throughness, transitions are really our go-to for developing throughness in the longitudinal field of balance. In the lateral field of balance, we have exercises like shoulder in and haunches in, where we can drive one hind leg up into the reins at a time by doing the lateral work. This will lead to increased throughness because you are pushing one hind leg or the other further under the horse's body and up into the reins. And when the hind leg goes under the body, you're getting a little bit of weight shift. If one hind leg is more difficult to bring up and under and up to the reins, then the rider can choose to do more on that side to address the asymmetry. All right, so as we're getting close to the end here, I did want to touch on exercises that don't help throughness, because there are some, and that's fine. Not all exercises are meant to do everything. So the exercises that don't increase throughness are loosening and stretching exercises, such as leg yield and riding long and low, or in the lower level dressage test, the stretchy circle, right? That's an exercise that doesn't increase throughness. They don't connect to the hind end and the front end, and it's not supposed to. That's not the point of those exercises. But again, it would be important that the rider would just be aware of that. If you're doing those exercises, know what the effects are, that they're not connecting the two ends. It's also important to know that loosening exercises can have the unintended consequence of decreasing throughness. So not only not training throughness, which is one thing, like in a neutral effect, but it can actually decrease throughness because the horse is not connected from end to end. The hind legs go back into thrust mode, not carrying mode, as the horse reaches down and out with the neck. More weight goes on the forehand, and it's just like a teeter-totter, right? You're on the teeter-totter, you go up in the air, you can see the other end of the teeter-totter down in front of you where the greater weight is. The neck becomes long and flexible when we're, say, doing the stretchy circle, and the rein aids get a little bit lost in it. The rein aids don't go back into the hind legs because in the stretching exercises they are not meant to. And that's fine. It's perfectly fine to do that if you're taking a break, but you wouldn't want to spend a lot of time there training that. The back can also be stretched into stiffness, making it harder for the horse to connect through the neck and back when the rider does want to pick the horse up again and weave the neck into the back. So just as you maybe, bending over, stretching your back gardening for a long period of time, and then you stand up and it's a bit achy and it takes you a couple of steps to kind of get things swinging again, that can also be how the horse feels if it spends too long of a time in that position. Again, it's fine for a rest period, but it's not a training method that will not actually help you shift balance and develop carrying power. If you're not sure if you're developing thrust or developing carrying power, just try a simple transition again. Just try trot to walk and ask yourself if the horse dropped down in the front. All right, so remember, in the realm of throughness and shifting balance, as the horse takes more and more load behind, they actually go less forward. So, for example, Piaffe is the most extreme example of collecting the trot gait. And when the horse is in Piaffe at the Grand Prix level, they are marking time on the spot. So you have all of that energy, you have all of that lift, and you're not going anywhere. In the canter pirouette, it's the most extreme example of collecting the canter gait. Again, the most throughness, you're sitting the horse down, now you're turning a pirouette, but also you're not really going anywhere. When you're developing a pirouette canter, it's very, very short and uphill. The extended gaits require throughness not to do them, but rather to get in and out of them. A horse can extend the trot on the forehand, but he won't be able to make his way to a balanced transition in and out of it, or get to more collected gaits or piaffe without developing more throughness. We're always looking for that genuine shift of balance, which is rooted in the hind legs. Throughness, the permeability of the horse to the aids, and the flow of energy from end to end is an ongoing project for every horse, every transition, every ride. It's an overarching concept that we can use to apply to all of our exercises and our riding each day. Thank you so much, and I will open the floor for questions in case.